Second, and I've kind of referred to this a little bit obliquely already, is that the urgent kept overwhelming the important. And this is usually described as you're just fighting the current fire. And this is, in fact, a fire in the Republican Palace in late August. Um, the computer room was apparently wasn't wired properly and caught fire, and they couldn't put it out for a while because they had put the Texas barriers and the Jersey barriers and everything were too close to the building, and they couldn't pull a full-size firefighting equipment alongside to be able to fight the fire. But anyway, there were a lot of problems there. I'm not talking about all of them, but we were constantly being distracted. I was currently being distracted, but so were other people by things that were not really the important things to do. You know, develop an election model. Okay, that sounds like that's in my line of things. I can do that. The next day, it's, hey, somebody in the White House said they want Iraq to be an ally, not just a partner. What does that mean? Okay, I'll go do that. What happens if Grand Ayatollah Sistani dies? Okay, I'll go work on that. By the way, the guy's still alive. The guy is still alive. That's how important it was to figure out what happens if he dies. But doing that, the whole thing about Fallujah, okay, if you want to attack Fallujah or somewhere else, okay, I guess that's important. But why am I doing that? What do I know about which city we ought to attack? I've only been on the job for a few days. I had to pull out a map to figure out where the cities were. Not really, but it was urgent because somebody wanted it done. This kept happening over and over again. Even the strategic surprise scenarios that I mentioned, they were urgent. Oh no, they're going to try to kill a whole bunch of us before George W. Bush can get reelected. So therefore, Tom, instead of figuring out our strategy for the future, worry about whether or not we're actually prepared for these things that might or might not happen. And in most cases, we really weren't very well prepared for them. So yay for that. And there are many other examples of that where this would happen, where I'd just be working on something and my boss would divert me with some hot issue, or the two-star would grab me in the hallway and say, Tom, what do we know about the election commissioners for Iraq? Like, I don't know, and I'm not sure I care, sir. Probably didn't actually say that, but I might have thought that. He's like, well, we need to figure out who they are. Find out what we know about them. Like, okay, I'll just stop whatever I'm doing, and we'll now go off and do this task the two-star once done. And that's fine. Actually, that was kind of funny. They went down to civil affairs, and civil affairs say, no, that's all very, very secret. Nobody knows who these people are because they're being protected, because they're at risk. I went over to the State Department, and they gave me pictures of everybody, printouts of their bio, practically their home address. So I'd be able to give that to my boss. Yeah, success for me. I was able to do that. Just took a day to do this work. But it was constantly little things like that that were diverting us. But what's different, military strategy, the enemy gets a vote, and that's certainly true. But we were doing this to ourselves. We were not staying focused on the important things that we had decided were important as we were doing them. Instead, we were distracting ourselves and not getting things done. And the consequence of that, and diverting people and not staying focused on this, was that, I got September 4th is when I was assigned the task of figuring out an election model, who's going to win the election, how might the election turn out, and what might it mean for our policy for the future. I don't get that task done until November 8th, which happens to be the first day of the invasion of Fallujah. And one might ask, perhaps, Tom, why did it take you 65 days to complete this task? Just exactly how lazy are you? Are you stupid? Can't you do this? And it's like, well, no, actually, I didn't. I could spend one day of the next month actually working on this task because I sent off doing other things. But the problem with that was that it might have been useful to have an idea whether we cared which election outcome was, like, say, we're thinking about the withdrawal plan. Because one of the thoughts on the withdrawal plan was, well, if we announce a withdrawal plan, or we get Ayat Ali to announce a withdrawal plan, and he can stand with General Casey or George Bush, who cares? And say, we have reached an agreement with the Americans. After this is all over, they're going to leave in 2006, and the Americans are going to leave. It makes him look great. But we weren't entirely sure whether we cared whether we wanted him to look great. We weren't sure we really had any preference for him getting reelected or not reelected, because we hadn't figured out what the election outcomes might mean for our future. By the time we figured it out, it was too late. It was obviously way too late for that to make any difference. Similarly, on the Fallujah, I'm looking at the Fallujah campaign from, well, Is it going to reduce violence? How risky is it? I'm not thinking in terms of our decisive points of the campaign. It's not until later that we reviewed the campaign plan and determined the decisive point of the campaign is going to be an election around the first of the year in Iraq that is perceived as legitimate by the Iraqi people. That was what we decided was a key decisive point that was a precursor to any chance of then following along with a writing the constitution that's acceptable to Iraq and eventually a democratic government in Iraq that eventually turn the center of gravity to use all the military lingo, but the center of gravity of the war was, are the people of Iraq supporting our enemy, or are they supporting the process that we have set up? And that was our key decisive point. But because we hadn't identified that was a key decisive point yet until the end of September, I couldn't use that as a reason not to attack Fallujah, although obviously it wasn't a reason not to attack Fallujah because, if you attack Fallujah, that is going to make it more difficult for the Sunni Arabs to participate in the election, and that will delegitimize the election. So we're less likely to have a legitimate election if we carry out this war, to carry out this attack. But we didn't know that yet. We should have known it because it's not terribly clear to me why I am working on a review of the campaign plan in September of 2004, 18 months after we invade the country. But nevertheless, that's what I'm doing because that's my job and no one else had quite done that yet. So that was a problem. This idea of constantly the urgent thing to do would be there and distracting us from what we're supposed to do. This wasn't just in my office. There are some urgent things. We're under attack every other day, indirect fire, stuff like that. That's certainly a distraction. We're not getting much sleep for the same reason. That's a distraction. Working conditions are terrible. That's a distraction. We're sick a lot. That's a distraction. That's urgent. But this was happening in other offices as well. The assessment office, for example, was tracking 200 different indicators for weekly briefing up to the command staff. 200. I have trouble thinking 200 indicators were actually all important, but that's what they were doing. And color coding them as green or as blue or as yellow or as amber or as red. And they're doing a lot of work, but I think distilling this down into which ones are really the important ones rather than this is something somebody thinks is a good idea. And doing that would have helped. Now, here again, what is urgent in current national security policy? Is attacking Iran important or urgent? I'm not really going for audience participation. Nobody answered. Is it important or urgent? I don't know. I've not understood why we might be attacking Iran. I look back at the national security strategy, and Iran is mentioned once as no longer a problem because we've obliterated them. And the national security strategy has 4 paragraphs on, and this is, by the way, last month's national security strategy. I'm not referring to like Biden era or Obama era. Last month's national defense strategy has 4 paragraphs that, under the title of Iraq, 2 of which aren't actually about Iraq. One's actually about Yemen, and the other one's actually about Israel. But they again say that we have obliterated Iraq's nuclear capability. They are no longer a threat. We have destroyed all their alliances and all of this. So according to at least our official documents, it's not important. But nevertheless, it seems to suddenly be urgent. Now, maybe it's become important in a way that I don't know. But I am concerned that, again, in our current national security policy, are we pursuing a concrete set of clear objectives that, what's our decisive points that we want to go to? Do we want to, have the Russia-Ukraine war end on certain terms? Do we want to, how do we want to resolve crisis with China? These used to be the important things. Now we are concerned with regime change in Cuba, regime change in Venezuela. We've attacked just this year Nigeria, assistance for attacks in Mexico, a whole variety of things. They're all happening all over the place that I think may well be distracting us from whatever might be important. Certainly it's using up time, and I hope that the people who are working in the national security staff, which has also been smaller than it used to be, are not being taken away from things that are more important by things that someone has decided is the urgent thing to do right now. I hope that's not happening. I'm certainly concerned, though, that it is.